Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's session. My name is Jonathan Tavera. I'm the CFO for Premier Communications and also a member of the ICA Annual Meeting Committee. It is my honor this morning to introduce this morning's session speaker, Kristy Szabo. Kristy has more than 26 years of experience in business finance. She executes historical financial analysis, financial forecasting, budgets, and feasibility studies. Kristy works to help secure loan and grant funds for clients to build broadband networks in unserved and underserved areas across the country. Please join me in welcoming the Queen of Consulting herself, Ms. Kristy Szabo.
Jonathan, that was this guy right here, Mr. Toby. See, I told you I'd call you out. Good morning, everybody. Wow, you guys are like the brave ones showing up last day at 8:30 in the morning to talk about grant compliance. Oof. And the last day. So thank you for doing that. As Jonathan said, my name is Kristy Szabo. I'm with Vantage Solutions. We are based in Mitchell, South Dakota. Everybody should hopefully know where that is. We're right next door. But I'm going to spend the next 45 minutes talking about reporting and compliance for grants. It's not an overly fun subject, so I was told, make it fun. So if you guys have jokes and you want to add some commentary, by all means, I will embrace that. So my contact information is here. I believe these slides will be provided to you. So if you have questions and you don't want to bring them up in the group, I understand. But if you want to talk afterwards, shoot me an email, give me a call. Would love to talk to you to see how we can answer any questions that don't get addressed this morning. So I have been with Vantage Point for just over 18 years, have seen quite a bit of change with funding as it's been coming down the pipe. I am also, I could say I am queen of Post-it notes. If you see my desk, I do have quite a bit of Post-it notes. That's how I kind of live on some of my day-to-day tasks. I show this slide to kind of just put a sense of perspective of when I first started in Vantage Point. One of the first grant programs that I worked with was the RUS Community Connect grant. Show of hands, you guys have heard of the Community Connect grant with RUS. It's been around. Has anyone participated in the early days of Community Connect? Has anyone been a recipient? So when I first came on board, and it was 2006, one of my first projects was this for a company up in Alaska. They were awarded funding, and when we looked at the compliance, the ongoing reporting from that first Community Connect, very, very simple. You could do the compliance tracking with 2, 3, maybe 4 Post-it notes, and you'd be totally fine. You wouldn't have to get overwhelmed. Where we're at today is something very similar to this Post-it note wall. I don't have that many in my office. Does anybody else kind of relate with Post-it notes? All right, so you can relate. You can maybe make a nice artistic mural if you're very creative, but this is kind of a sense of where we're at today. When we look at the funding programs, there's a lot of money. You guys have been living and breathing it for the last several years, and we've got more money that's still coming down the pipe. And so to navigate all of those programs, it's quite a challenge. Hopefully you've got something in process, or if you don't, you're here today and I'll try to give you some tips. But it is overwhelming. It does take someone that is very detail-oriented, likes schedules, likes order, to be able to maintain and navigate this through the process. So what I'm going to cover, what funding programs are there today, what we've been participating in, what the status is on some of those. Then we're going to jump into reporting and compliance on some of those requirements, how to navigate that, and then gotchas that we've seen through other clients that we've worked with, other programs, and how we've been able to try to learn from our mistakes. So that's what we're going to cover. With this group that we've got, I like to be interactive, so by all means, if you've got questions or something I say you want to maybe elaborate a little bit more on, raise your hand. We'll try to address it. I want to make this as interactive as possible because, again, it's not an overly exciting topic, but it's one that I live and breathe, and I enjoy it. So, Capital Projects Fund. This is a program that Iowa has already seen exposure with funding coming into the state, about $149 million. What this has been was COVID. Again, we've lived that, we've breathed it, we're still talking about it, and the funds are still coming down the pipe to help fix the issues that we had when everything shut down back in 2020. So the Capital Projects Fund is the fund that's being overseen by the U.S. Department of Treasury. 42, excuse me, I always get this in bead flipped around, 10 billion nationwide. Iowa received 149 for that. To date, 50 states plus the District of Columbia has received funding or had their plan approved from the U.S. Treasury for the dollars. We are to prioritize projects that are fixing the issue we had with COVID, connecting locations that have poor, inadequate service, they're unserved, underserved, supporting recovery from the COVID, from telehealth, telework, remote learning, distance learning, all of those pieces that the funds were to go to improve our infrastructure to help us be able to navigate that. Provide reliable and also affordable broadband. And with this, we know the funds are getting out into the states. With the funding, there is a strict deadline that the projects and the funds have to be done by December of 2026. Iowa, your fund was issued as part of the NOFA 8, which was done last year in 2023. So knowing that when you applied for those funds, if you were successful, you knew that timeline is looming, that you've got to have them built out and completed. RUS Reconnect. This has been a program that's been quite successful. This is overseen by USDA. We've had 4 complete rounds of funding to date. $4.79 billion of funding has been issued to providers like yourselves across the entire United States. We are right now in round 5 of Reconnect funding. We've got $700 million that people are currently trying to find areas that will meet the eligibility criteria to get an application put together. One thing that I highlight is with Reconnect, it's federal funding. They are pretty strict that you make sure you are compliant with the procedures as established in 7 CFR Part 1740. Those have been modified slightly, but these are what govern the program. The window is open right now for round 5. Like I said, that opened last week on the 22nd of March, and application deadline is May 21st. So I say that because if you are looking at wanting to apply for these funds, start the process now, because it is a very, very heavy load from an application perspective. It's not something you can decide May 1st, and it's like, you know what, I think we need to look at this Reconnect stuff and think you may get a solid application put together, because it's a very heavy load. We're looking total company view. So not just your project specific, where if you participated in any of the Iowa NOFA rounds, it's been project specific. This is company specific. We're looking at a 5-year plan for all of your CapEx, not just your project. Also looking at subscribers, what you're projecting, existing, new, churn, and all of your revenues, the financials. So it is a very heavy load, and it's a little bit of a challenge to try to find an area that will hit. With the scoring component, this is where we need to look at your area to see how you can fly into these. 150 points total. It is a very, very competitive program. We are oversubscribed every round of funding that we do. There's a lot more requests than what there are dollars. So here's this round's funding. So as you can see, rurality of the PFSA is the most points that you can get in that category. But this is also the hardest category, because it is based on a population density, not location, of 6 per square mile served. So when we look at the areas, you have to fall either within the 100-mile radius of a populous area. That's where you have to hit that 6 population per square mile. If you live outside that perimeter, you get those points. Well, there's very few areas that fall within or without the 100-mile radius. So that is a very hard one to get. Economic need, it's based on persistent poverty. We have the affordability Affordable Connectivity Program, the ACP. Is anybody taking bets on whether Congress is going to refund that? Anybody? I was very optimistic, but my optimism has really gone down. I don't know. But with that, you have to commit to participating in the ACP, even though it's almost gone, or a successor program. But you also have to have a plan that is affordable when we look at the comparable rates. Labor standards, prevailing wage, you're compliant with employment laws, and then you also promote workforce development. That one is, depending on the state, Iowa, I think for the most part, your prevailing wages are okay. Neighboring state, Illinois, is a whole different beast. Prevailing wages are very, very high in Illinois. So that's the thing to kind of take into play. Tribal lands, based on map. So you're only going to get those if you fall on tribal lands. Local government, nonprofit, cooperative. That one is pretty easy to get for most companies are cooperatives, profitable ones, stockhold companies, you're not going to get those points. Socially vulnerable communities, again, that's going to be based on the mapping layer. Net neutrality, this requires a board resolution that you're going to allow fair access to the network. You're not going to block any of that in piece, so that's a pretty easy one. We're all doing that today. And then the last category is a new one that got put in place, and they tied this in line with how the BEAD allocations were made. So it's on a state basis of total unserved locations on the population basis. So when we look at the map, Iowa, unfortunately, you guys don't fall into one of those top 10 states, but our neighboring states, South Dakota and Nebraska, do. So this is a view of the map. If you've not gone out to the Reconnect map, and if you're looking at the funding, this map gives you an idea of what is actually not eligible. They say it's the eligibility map, but what it's showing you is areas that are protected and cannot be applied for. But then it also gives us some of those other layers where you're going to get those added points. So if you can see on the map over here, I apologize, you guys probably can't see the map very well. But the grayed areas are all areas that have been protected from an RUS perspective. So there's either a current Community Connect, there's either a current Reconnect, or a traditional RUS loan, or those type of dollars. Those are protected from the basis, assuming that the recipient has built out to greater than 25.3. That's our threshold. As you see on your left, the pink, that is that rurality piece, the most rural states. So South Dakota and Nebraska do qualify. If you were building in those areas, you would get 5 extra points as part of that scoring criteria. We also can see not a lot of persistent poverty in here. That would be like a purplish color. There's nothing that pops up. You've got the economic need of the community, SAPE. There's a little piece over there in Illinois you can see, but in Iowa, no. And then we've got the socially vulnerable. There are socially vulnerable, that's like that olivey greenish color on there. Those would be the areas that would get you more points. When you look at this, you may be saying, well, what about RDOF? What about CAF2 enhanced ACAM areas? Those are not eligible for funding. The map really requires you to do a deep zoom in to get those layers to pop up. So these are going to be all areas where a provider has either accepted enhanced ACAM, because those locations are not eligible for funding because you're getting federal funding with an obligation to build out greater than that 100 by 20 piece. We also have the RDOF for areas that are getting higher than 25.3, 100 by 20. Those are all blocked out. They're not going to be eligible. So I'm kind of showing this because if you're looking at funding, it's not something you can do overnight because the mapping is probably one of the biggest issues of having to navigate what you can apply for. This map I show because it is a good reflection of what funding has been awarded in these areas. I put the link on there, so if you get the slides and you want to go navigate this, but you can see by the chart, we identify the Reconnect, Community Connect Broadband Initiatives Program, the BIP, and then we also have broadband borrowers and then regular infrastructure borrowers. So BEAD funding. When we talk about BEAD funding, is anyone on BEAD hangover? It's been a while that we've been talking about it, but I do think we strongly need to still look at BEAD. It's a lot of money when we talk $42 billion. Someone is going to get it. We want providers who know and are truly dedicated to getting service out to our areas that understand that component to get the funding. And that would be you guys in the room here. So it's administered by NTIA. State allocations, you all have your state amounts. For Iowa, we've got $415 million that's coming to your state. That's a lot of money. Anyone want to share their thoughts on BEAD? Okay. So from a timeline perspective, we really are kind of in overload. We've been waiting and waiting and waiting. The IIJA was signed back in 21. Kind of see the timeline here. We had the NOFA released in May of 22. We had the states have to do their letter of intent. They had to do their 5-year action plan. Then as of the end of this year, or last year, December 27th of 2023, all states had to have their Volume 1 and Volume 2s submitted to NTIA. Iowa, your Volume 1 has been approved. We're waiting for the challenge process of what that's going to fall from a date perspective. Waiting for the Volume 2, which the Volume 2 is going to give us the guidelines on how I still refer it to as the OCIO, how they're going to actually implement the funding window, what that's going to look like. So where we're at is now these little hollowed out dots. We're waiting for the challenge. We're waiting for the selection. We're waiting for the final piece to get done. And we're waiting for infrastructure. So we're now almost 2.5 years out from when we all started talking about BEAD. I know I've been talking about BEAD for a very long time, and you guys have been hearing about BEAD for a long time. Here's where the state of Iowa is. This is the current timeline that the site has out there. You can see where you've hit the targets, you've hit the dates, but now we're in wait mode. So mapping is the talk. We've been talking about mapping, and we've got more than just one map that we have to focus on. Has anybody found when you look at your area that when you look at the state of Iowa map and the broadband data collection map that they are perfect? There's that joke, yes. And you look at your staff, I mean, how much time have you and your staff been spending to try to get the maps correct? Does anyone want to throw a guess on how much time you guys have been throwing out there? A lot. Thank you, a lot. And it's unfortunate that all of these funding dollars are dependent on the maps. You are basically either you're protecting your territory by making sure the challenges are done. You are wanting to make sure that communities or rural areas are not served, but they're being claimed as being served. So that falls on you to try to get those locations made eligible to apply for funding. It's not an easy process, and I think we've all got gray hairs trying to navigate what map do I look like, how do I get the map fixed. I show this is probably an outdated map. It's the most recent available map on the OCIO site. I think it was the Volume 5. But we're working with this when the OCIO puts out their updated map, and then we're also working on this fun map. Whether you like it or not, if we were talking about all of these level of dollars coming out and we're still relying on the FCC Form 477 data, I think it'd be a lot worse. So I try to put a positive spin. I'm typically a very positive, optimistic person, but the mapping has been a very, very challenge for me to stay positive. But here's what we're working with. If you've not looked at this, take time. Yes, Tammy. Say that again.
The previous map was the gray or bluish areas the eligible?
Those, yeah. So it's outdated. Yep. But if you've not gone through the process after you've done your BDC filing to request from CostQuest the Tier D license, anyone show of hands already gone through the process of getting your Tier D license or know what I'm talking about? Kristy in the front. So with you as providers, you're doing your BDC filing, you get access to your fabric. So the fabric you get is just your location showing the information. Obviously you're looking at it from your perspective, but when you can go through and request the Tier D from CostQuest, you will get the full fabric, and you can only use that if you're applying for federal funding. They say if you're a prospective applicant wanting to look at federal funding, you can use that Tier D license to strategize and figure out what makes sense. So if you've not gone through that process, From our experience, we've had providers that have requested that and they've got it back within a couple days. We've had others that have navigated a couple of weeks plus. So recommend doing that if you haven't. Again, that's going to give you a lot more level of information so you can identify what's eligible, what's ineligible, what's being claimed, served or not. With BEAD and with Reconnect 5, what we are looking for, when on this view here, you can see what the technology is and if it's a wireless, is it licensed or unlicensed? With BEAD and Reconnect 5, if a wireless provider is providing service using unlicensed spectrum, those locations are deemed eligible. So you could apply for them because they're not deemed as being served. But if it's licensed spectrum, then it is deemed as served and would not be eligible for funding. So, any questions on maps? Again, we've got another view. Here's where Empower Iowa has been. This is not reflecting the most recent NOFA 8, but this was the most recent one that I could pull. But to date, your state has invested $517 million, of which part of that includes the Capital Projects Fund, but this is the funds that have been allocated. Any questions on that? Any of that information? Okay. So if you're an awardee, question is, hopefully you've been an awardee and you've already maybe had this question, but as you're looking at other funding coming down the pipe and you're able to maximize funding and able to use funding from Iowa NOFA 8765, Community Connect or Reconnect, or hopefully down the road BEAD, each program is going to be totally different. So to keep the telecom spin in, I threw this picture up, if you guys can see that over here. If you were to have me go in and hook up your wires and get your connectivity, that before picture is probably what you're gonna see, because I don't know what I'm doing on that piece. I know financials, I know accounting, but yeah, you wouldn't want me in there. But what you should have would be the after picture, a lot neater. What I relate to, I'm sure everybody here, if you're honest, can relate to this. Does everyone have one of these either at home or maybe in your office? When you see that, it's like, I gotta get it cleaned. Give me a day, you purge. And then before you know it, we're right back there. I totally can relate to this. I have one of these drawers at home. It's a matter of I'm in a hurry, I've got people coming over, slide it into my drawer. But eventually I get it to look like this. Very nice, neat, organized, and straight. What we want to do as we're talking about grant funding is start out with this, keep it this, don't revert back to this. So if anything you take away from this session this morning is be organized. Be organized, be organized, be organized. So as we look at what is required from a reporting perspective, there is a lot of detail. So again, when I said at the beginning, when you started with Community Connect, it was a very simple, once a year, you entered it into the RUS data collection system. One and done, next year done, next year done. We are now at the point with RUS that we are doing quarterly reporting, and we're doing annual reporting, and we're doing more than just our financial reporting. Which, from an audit and compliance perspective, it's good. We're talking a lot of dollars. So you want to make sure those dollars are going to the places that they're supposed to go. You've got that oversight. So in a sense, yes, it's good that we have this, but it's unfortunate that we are at this because there's been players in the past who've not done it correctly. They misappropriated some of those dollars and it didn't go where it was. So the oversight is there. It can be managed, it can be navigated, but making sure you do it right from the beginning and not saying, I'll put it off until tomorrow. But from an RUS perspective, here is a chart. They do a very good job, RUS, if I can put that as a positive thing, as far as giving you the details of what they're going to expect. So when you're getting ready to apply for funding, go through what's going to be required post-award. So from here, we've got financial reports that are due quarterly. We've got a system data report that's due annually. Audit report. As an RUS borrower, you have to do an audit. That's not something new. So that's just highlighting that, yep, we still want to see your audit. Construction progress reports annually. We have to do an annual performance report annually. Then once the project is completely done, we'll have our closeout report that we have to file. But then on an ongoing basis, we have to do the annual project performance activity report, and then once the project is completely closed, then we'll have that final. Anyone early days remember doing the financial reporting? It was pretty darn easy. Do your income statement, do your balance sheet, maybe a cash flow, and that's about it. The financials have gotten very more detailed. As we look at the network access service revenues, because those have changed over several years, how we're getting those funds from what bucket, if you want to say so, we have to detail and outline each component of our network access revenues that we're receiving, quarterly and annually. So are you an ACAM? Are you getting enhanced ACAM? Are you still getting special access, switched access? All of those have to be broken out line by line. They want to see that. We then also have to break out detailed our non-operating income, specify where we're getting our dollars, income from dividends, income from interest. Do we have equity investments? Those all have to be done. Roll up into an income statement. We have our balance sheet, statement of cash flows, and then from subscriber data with RUS, they want to see what you're getting for subscribers. We had to do our projections in our application. They want to see where we're hitting that on an annual basis and quarterly, where we're at. What are we seeing for new? Where's our churn? What's our net adds, net loss, and where we're at as of the net period. And that's primarily broadband. So you don't have to worry about building in your voice subscribers or your video if you're still doing video, strictly broadband. And then our audit report, that's going to be just an upload. System data, RUS likes our depreciation rates, so they want to know what we're depreciating. They want to know what our network is looking at. Are we wireless? Are we wireline? Then our construction progress involves maps. We have to provide a map of what we've got built. We provide in our application where we're going to build. As part of our reporting, we have to show them what we've got done. So that's going to be a map showing where we've completed our construction to date. Performance, what we're delivering for service, for speed, where we're at from that component. And then close out RUS will go through, make sure you built where you said you were going to do, you delivered what you said you were going to do, and that everything is in checks and balance. So then they will come on site, and that's a fun visit as well. Capital Projects Fund. We are here looking at semi-annual. That's going to be the least amount of reporting you're going to have to do. They may have you do more. That's going to fly on what the state is requiring as well, because capital projects funds are going down to the state. The state then is the one that's giving the money out, so you're compliant with both federal and state. The big thing that we are seeing in states is it's not just telling me where the locations are on a map, but we're having to cross-validate our address locations with our lat and long added locations in the fabric. So this has been a challenge. It's been a time burn making sure you have your addresses and that they match with what you're saying for locations. Types of facilities constructed. Big push with all of these programs to have fiber. We all know fiber is it, right? Whether your speed requirement is going to be a 100 by 100 symmetrical to every location, 100 by 20, what you're committing to building out as far as what network type in correlation with the speeds, you'll be reporting that to make sure that it's compliant with what you said it would be. Retail rates, big push for affordability. So we have to show that we are actually providing services at affordable rates. Any agreements that you had stated in your application that you would be required to have in place to actually deliver what you say you're going to do, those agreements have to make sure that they're active, that they're in compliance, and that they're in place and aren't going to expire. Depending on the entity, they may want to see those actual agreements. Financial reports, again, those are going to be required. And then labor status. So this is going to be the one if you are obligated to do prevailing wage, that you've got your checks and balances, you've been compliant with those requirements. Your contractors have been compliant with that. If you said in your application that you are going to hire X number of employees, have you done that? Have you had minority women components that you committed to? all of those type of pieces that you claim, you're gonna have to support that you actually did. I put in bold the compliance component, 2 CFR Part 200. This is live and breathe. If you're getting federal funding and they reference 2 CFR 200, make sure you or someone on your staff who you're working with understand what those components are. One of the big ones is probably the procurement. That is a section 200.317 to 320 some. That's a big one. We have seen that with some states where the client is like going, I'm not gonna worry about it, I'll just get a waiver at the end. I use Bob's Construction for everything. I'm not gonna put it out to bid, I'm good. You can't go through this with the assumption that I'll get a waiver, I'll be good, all is fine. Make sure you're starting at the beginning knowing what those compliant requirements are gonna be from that section. So looking at BEAD, this is still in play. I italicized the top one, participating in the ACP. That's still in the NOFA. It's still a requirement, even though we know the money is almost gone. I sure hope my optimistic sight comes into play and that Congress refunds the pool of that dollars, but I don't know. But if not the ACP, what successor program are they going to implement? Cybersecurity risk management plan, supply chain management plan based on the NIST framework. If you're an enhanced ACAM company, hopefully you've already got this in place. You had to file. Anybody still navigating getting this in place? Anybody wants to say, I'm still working? You guys are good, you're perfect, right? Okay. This has been an undertaking that Toby in the front row here, I'm gonna call on him. His group has been preaching and talking to clients for several years before this became a component, is everybody should have something in place to secure your network. Go through that type of training, but have that piece in place. It's not a cheap process, it's a costly process to implement. Make sure you're training staff and have it in place. Whoops. Irrevocable letter of credit, this is still a requirement. We have to have that in place, equal 25% of our grant if we go that route. And we also need to make sure that we're talking to our legal counsel that we're gonna have that legal opinion from our attorney, that hopefully it doesn't happen, but if you were to go through bankruptcy, that this project, the award would be protected. That would not get absorbed in bankruptcy. And then the open access wholesale piece, this has been one that's kind of had us boggled because in the NOFA they reference a middle mile. But then middle mile is not a sole purpose that you can use BEAD funding for. It's last mile connections. So this is one that kind of scratches our head. I know ICA, Dave Duncan has been in talking on this. It's like, so you mean if I build my network, I have to let anybody and everybody come on and compete with me? I think the way it was initially written is we're giving you lots of dollars, several federal funding dollars. We want to make sure we're being good stewards of that dollar and letting everybody have access to it. So this is something that we want to watch out before we go through the process of applying, and truly what is that going to mean for you as a provider. So with the irrevocable standby letter of credit, there's still been some confusion or questions that we've been getting as far as the requirement, the compliance piece of this as a BEAD recipient. NTIA fielded questions from day one on, are you kidding me, we have to do this? Because the way the NOFA was written is it's very similar to what we had to do for RDOF. So any RDOF recipients in the room? Hey, you guys are brave to show your hands, congrats. But this is a requirement that you had to have in place. The requirements are listed there, 47 CFR. No less than 25% of your subaward amount has to be the amount of the letter of credit. NTIA, thank goodness, did have some sense and did a partial waiver to the LOC. They're not eliminating it, it's still there, but they gave you an option to, well, maybe not just do a letter of credit, let us do a performance bond. So that is a good thing from a perspective. Performance bond is you pay a cost, you've got it secured. It's like an insurance policy to be kind of 101 term. A letter of credit is basically an obligation that you have to reflect on your books because it comes into play with your calculations of your ability to finance, what's your leverage ratios. So that had been the big thing, because when we're talking millions of dollars, a letter of credit is not cheap, and you don't want those dollars basically tied up. Even though you're not borrowing on them, your banker has to take that into account. Right now, it had been a bank. You had to have a bank, but they've now expanded that to allow credit unions also to be the ones to give those out. The thing is that it has to have a WISE credit rating score of a B- or greater. And there is a site you can go to, so if you question, is like, well, does my bank even have that? Am I eligible to use my bank? There is a site that you can go and see what your bank's rating score is. But again, that letter of opinion. And I kind of put this in here because those aren't cheap. A bank isn't going to just give you a letter of credit. There's going to be a fee. So funding is great, but it is costly. And so getting into a program, knowing what you're going to have to follow post-award, comes into play with budgeting as well. So BEAD reporting from that perspective, NTIA had put out some guidance of what the states are going to do, but then the states have the ability to add additional components to it. So I've already talked about some of the state components, but it's listing of addresses. What type of location is it? Is it a residential? Is it a business? Is it an enterprise? That has to be identified. Community anchor institutions, we have to identify those. What type of school healthcare system is that? So that's all part of your reporting. And then also looking at take rates. So making sure the dollars are being spent and that you're actually getting people to subscribe to broadband. We have to provide peak and off-peak actual speeds. So if we're stating that we're delivering 100 by 100, is our network being built to where it actually is able to deliver that? At this point, I have not seen where this is going to come into play with performance measurement testing, where you're going to have to be selected random samples. But if you get audited, you're going to have to make sure your network can deliver it. So they're wanting to see what you're actually doing. That affordability component, again, we need to make sure we're showing what our advertised speeds are, what our retail rates are. The SF 424 form, or 425 form, excuse me, that is a pretty standard form that you have to do if you've done any type of federal funding, so that shouldn't be too onerous of a process to do. Anything over $5 million, we have to do certifications of workforce, and there could be other reporting based on what the state does. So are you gonna have someone on staff that can do this all? Some people are very lucky. They've got the detail-oriented people that are going to be in place, and it's like, yeah, not a problem. Others are getting the funding, and it's like, oh, how do I manage this? What do I do? It's kind of a challenge. Iowa, we have a portal, the Iowa grants, and for the most part, to date, Iowa has been fairly okay to work with as far as the reporting programs. Obviously, SAM registration, that's required. Field validation process, you'll have to go through and do that. Again, we're committing to the affordable connectivity participation. Proof of purchase and proof of payment. I think if I have any comments or things that we've navigated has been the reimbursement process with the state. Making sure you've got invoices, making sure you've got proof that you paid it, the canceled checks. If you pay by credit card, or if you do by ACH, that you've got statements to show you've actually paid those invoices. This has been one that has been either, depending on how big or large the project is, either pretty okay to navigate, or others it's been a challenge. So making sure you have that in place is probably the big piece. And then quarterly status reporting. So overall, I think I've got about 5 minutes left here. While the basis of the funds coming to us are very similar, it's all to get broadband out, right? The intent is we know we've got areas that are unserved. We know that there's inadequate or poor service depending on what type of technology is out there. The goal is to get broadband out there. Each program, yes, that's the goal, but then on the back side, there are different. So we can't assume all programs are the same. We're going to have similarities, but RUS has its own portal. Iowa has its own portal. depending on other programs, it's not, this is how we're gonna do our reports. It varies. Similar components, but it's all gonna be different. But the main piece is build-out obligation. Yes, we wanna make sure we're compliant, we're having that oversight of we're building it to where we said we were going to. Our financial covenants, that is primarily associated with RUS funding, Community Connect and Reconnect. There's a component that if we're giving you the money, you need to show us that you can support it down the road. The lien on the assets is probably a big one depending on what we're looking at for program. RUS, if you are using grant funds, just grant funds, they put a mortgage on, the lien mortgage on just the grant funded assets. If you are doing loans with RUS, it's a blanket mortgage, so everything has RUS and they take first priority. So you need to coordinate with your lender if you have debt on the books today to make sure that they're okay with sharing that lien because RUS takes priority. BEAD, Capital Projects Fund, different bucket, they're gonna put those assets in trust. So that means if you're looking at wanting to sell, you get to have to go through the process of getting approval before you can sell those assets. For the most part, it can be managed fairly, I don't want to say simple, but they give you the requirements of what it's need. But if you're wanting to sell your company for some reason, acquisition or a merger, that's going to hold that up. So knowing what that's going to look like on your assets and how to navigate that. The reporting obligations, Davis-Bacon impacts, and again, what those procurement requirements are going to be. So some gotchas, assuming each project is the same. We aren't a one-size-fits-all society anymore. We're all different. All the programs are different. We've got some similar components, but each program is completely different as far as what the requirements are going to be. Documentation or lack of. We're all busy. You know, it's hard to carve out more time in our day to make sure we're tracking on this, but get somebody who is OCD, maybe strong type A personality, it's gotta be this way. It'll be a lot smoother. They may be a little hard to navigate with personality type, but they will document, they will keep it organized, they're gonna keep your drawer nice and clean rather than messy and disheveled. Organized. Accounting records, invoicing and reimbursements. In Iowa, you guys have been very blessed as far as 8 rounds of funding. You've been able to hopefully strategize and position, we're gonna build this area, we're gonna build this area, we're gonna build this area. And there was a couple years where those fundings, you had 2 or 3 rounds of funding in a year. And it makes sense to try to build with your contractor that we're gonna build this all together, same contractor, but make sure that they're documenting. This is NOFA 5, this is NOFA 6, this is NOFA 7, because they're gonna wanna see, we gave you $2 million for NOFA 5, did you spend that? Here's NOFA 6. Talking to your contractors, your consultants, your engineers, everything, make sure it's documented and organized that way, because it'll make it a lot easier on the backside when you're trying to close out and get your money back. And assuming a waiver, there is no way a waiver is going to be guaranteed, especially when we're looking at the federal government. So making sure you're following procedure, you're following what's required. And if you think you're gonna have an oops at the end and you're gonna need a waiver, be upfront, start having those communications with the broadband office or whoever it may be that you're coordinating with to get that process started as well. Closing thoughts, very beneficial. It's got red tape, there's hurdles, but I still am a strong believer a lot of these areas aren't gonna get built without grant funding. Funding is very beneficial to the program. It's a matter of doing your homework before you do your application. Do your due diligence, know what's gonna come with it once you're awarded and you're getting the funding. Know what you're getting in for. And free money is great, but it's not free. There is a cost component. Knowing ahead of time what your requirements are, you're gonna know, do I need a full-time person to do all of this compliance, post-award? Do I have trusted parties that I could work with, my consultants, my engineering firms that can help me navigate that? If so, what do we think the time commitment is gonna be so I can build that into my budget on a go forward? Some of the programs allow you to put a very small percentage in your application for project management, but it doesn't cover ongoing operating cost. So kind of knowing what you're getting into, kind of build into the cost. So be prepared. With that, any questions? Jonathan?
One question about Reconnect 5. How, with the quarterly and annual reporting you have to do, how far past the closeout date do you have to report on those? I know with Reconnect 2, we had a 2-year period where we had to continuously report. Is that still the same?
Correct. Correct. Yep. Thank you. Other questions? Tammy?
Progressing any on the taxability of the grant funds?
I would love to say yes, but no, it is still taxable. They're still pushing, there's still, I think, 2 or 3 bills pending that haven't made it across the finish line, but yes, taxable grant income.
So should we build that into our grants?
It can't be operating cost. So how can you if you can classify your tax, yes.
I received an email earlier this week for NOFA 8 saying that quarterly reports are not going to be required for this month because of technical issues.
Yep. Thank you. Other questions? So who has Iowa State going all the way in the NCAA championship? Woohoo! I do. I did last year. I spoke on the very opening day, and I put my bracket up there loud and proud. Iowa State, yeah, they lost in the first round, but I got faith this year. And the Hawkeyes, your girls, man, they're doing good too. So with that, I guess thank you all. I appreciate you giving your time early this morning on the last day, and we're entering Easter weekend, so my Easter blessings to you all. I hope you have a great weekend with your family. So thank you very much.